Thank you very much, and good to see an audience still awake and hopefully interested at 5:15 in the evening on a Sunday. So wonderful. So thanks, Rajesh, for being here.
Great to be here, Sanjay, with you.
Wonderful. So we'll keep this conversational and informal, so that we go away with more knowledge than when we came in. Startup to Proficorn is a very interesting, kind of enigmatic title. And as Socrates said, the beginning of wisdom starts with definitions. So what on earth is a Proficorn?
So let me tell you a story about how the words originated. Uh, it was, I think, Jan 2020. And all that media people wanted to write about were the unicorns. Companies raising a lot of capital. And my company, Netcore, at that time, as we were growing, we had been bootstrapped, as was my first company. Bootstrapped, profitable, and scaled. And I complained that no one would write about us. So one of my colleagues said, why don't you create a word to define companies like us? And I blurted out Proficorn as opposed to unicorn, where the idea is you raise a lot of capital and you kind of spend it to get into the next round of fundraising. And as I started using the word Proficorn, it sort of stayed in people's minds. And so that's really, a Proficorn is, in my world, 3 words. It's bootstrapped. It is profitable, because if you're bootstrapping it, there is no other way to raise capital. You've got to be profitable from very, very early on. And very importantly, it is scaled. Because there are lots of companies which are bootstrapped. The Kirana stores are bootstrapped, they are profitable, but they don't scale up. So I think the key really is, how do you scale? Not just startup, but then how do you scale the company? How do you do it profitably? And it's a very different mindset of building a company. And for the founding team, the difference it makes is that for a unicorn, you typically is $1 billion plus valuation. Founding team maybe owns 10%. But if in a Proficorn, you can get to 100 million in value, and you have the same wealth creation for the founding team. And it's much easier to get to that figure than something which is 10 times larger.
Right. And the other big difference is, a unicorn is a mythical animal. Proficorn is real. Right? and this is the story, and you must read the book to know more, of India's first internet entrepreneur, right? And that's the story of India World. So we'll get there as we make progress. A couple of other interesting points, right? I mean, you kind of bootstrap India World, very, very hardly much investment relative to today's thing, acquired for a wonderful price, all the rest of it. Along the way, right? And you have made lots of mistakes. And, the book talks of at least 30 mistakes that you've made,
yes,
failures on your journey. And so the question really I have for you is, take 1 or 2 of those mistakes that you've made, and what are the lessons you want everyone to learn from, and things that sort of stay in your mind?
Sure. So let me start with the first company which I had built, 95 to 99, India World, which was sold late 99 for 166 times revenue. So timing was very good, sold it for $115 million. Now, in there, we had built up India's first internet portals. And I'd built 13 portals. Only 4 of them worked. 9 did not work. But I would not have known which ones would have done well unless we had experimented with the others. So I think one of the key things as an entrepreneur, you realize fairly early on, is you have to experiment. While you need to get to product market fit, you need successes, but sometimes these things take time. So most important, what sort of holds people back many times is not failure itself, but the fear of failure. That's sort of what if I fail? What if this happens to me? So I think the first lesson really is that you need to experiment, you need to try out things, and be prepared that some things are not going to work. And the second important learning, and this is probably true for every one of the ideas which has failed in my 3 decades as an entrepreneur, is that I probably waited long every time in realizing that this idea is not going to work. So others are telling me, My wife would tell me, some of my friends would tell me, Rajesh, look, what you're doing is not going to work. But I was so passionate about that idea that I would say, one new customer, one breakthrough, and we'll be past that. We'll be past the sort of hum. And it didn't work out. In Image Workbench, my first product, one of the early products which I had done, for almost 1.5 years, I would try and sell it to metallurgy companies, as you wanted imaging. And I realized the sales cycle is just very long. But I built the software myself. And I found it very hard to give up. And that is when I realized that you have to close some doors for new doors to open. At times, while grit is great, you just have to say, it's not going to work, you have to give up. Close that door. In fact, when I look back in life, if my early first 2.5 years as an entrepreneur, some of those ideas had worked, and India World would never have happened. It's only when I decided that we've got to move on in life, this is not going to work, and then get on to the next idea. It's always hard. And what I typically, what I've learned is, don't analyze what you did wrong right away. Let some time elapse, so then you can think with a cool head, what are the mistakes you made in that journey, as you, in the failure which happened.
So, very important thing, I suppose the flip side of your pushing the idea or pursuing an idea in spite of feedback is kind of being obstinate or wedded to the idea, right? And, that has got its own
I
positives.
think you've got to realize that there are many people close to you who can see what's happening. Okay? And what they have is your interest. They are not as passionate about the venture that you're doing, but they can see it. They have probably better sensors than you are because we are biased. See, the reality in life is 99.99% startups fail. And yet every entrepreneur believes they have a 70% plus chance of success. And that's very important to get them started. If you go with the odds, no one will ever start up. But at times, you've got to accept that this is not working, let's move on, but listen to people around you.
You have to be crazy to be an entrepreneur because there's no rational reason to
Absolutely.
do it. Now, interestingly, Rajesh, like you said, you started in late 94, you had a wonderful exit in 99. Along the way, you also started Netcore kind of as a side business, and you're running that now for over 20 plus years. Extremely successful, 1,000 plus people, growing, all the rest of it. Why write the book now? Why not back then?
I've been writing a blog since 2000. Pretty much for the last 20 plus years, except for the few years I worked in the on the periphery of politics, so I couldn't write, about 7 years. And the way the book sort of came about is, I always thought I could write about 500 odd words a day. So I'd learned this from a blog early on. Dave Weiner used to run something called scripting.com, and he would post every day. And I said, that's a great way. It's a great habit to have, and that's what I used to do. And then in the pandemic began, I was very upset about the lockdown, so I restarted my blog. I had to express the anger. It's the wrong idea for India. So I said, okay, what better than to start this up? There was also a time when unicorns started firing people. If you remember April, May 2020, at that time. And then I sort of came up with this line, in times of crises, unicorns fire and Proficorns hire. And so then I wrote an essay on that. And I started writing a little bit around entrepreneurship at that time. And then a commissioning editor from Jayco read what I was writing. I normally write just for myself, but I write it publicly. And I write every day, still. And she wrote to me saying that, look, you've got the seed of a very interesting idea which could become a book. And I said, how many words is a book? And she said, like 65,000 words. I said, wait a minute, 500 I can think of writing. I said, let me come back to you after a year. Let me do 100 odd posts, 50,000 words. And then let's see if you like it, then we can work on a book. And that's how the book came about. So I had a lot of the ideas sort of in my head. And it needed, I think, some external validation that this idea of bootstrapping and profitability is something which is a niche in the market. No one's talked about this from their own personal experiences, especially in the Indian context. And I think, as I've seen now globally, I think this is, everyone assumes that when you want to create a venture, the first thing you got to do is to go out and raise capital. But what if the mindset is that I'm going to go out there, I'm going to build something, and I'm going to be profitable very quickly. And it's a very different approach to building a business. Because your profits really have to fund your growth. They become the venture capital rather than someone else's capital. And that's the sort of genesis of the book.
Fantastic. So in many ways, that itself is very entrepreneurial. Meaning, the timing had to be right, yes. Your mindset had to be right, market conditions had to be right.
Yeah, Sanjay, I think if the book had come out maybe a year and a half ago, when capital was just there all over the place, I don't think it would have done well. I think now there's a lot of interest. I gave a talk recently in the US, in Silicon Valley, about 3 months ago. And I thought there'll be 25 people. Silicon Valley is all about raise capital, as they say, go big or go home. And there were 250 people in the room. And I was shocked. So someone said, you've come with the complete anti-Silicon Valley mindset and model to talk about. But I think there's a lot of interest now in bootstrapping. But I think what also happens is, as businesses are being built, I think we are also reading stories of founders not in control of their own companies. If investors are owning 80, 90% of the business, the entrepreneur becomes really an employee in the company. And there's no say in the future direction. So I think this idea of profitability is, of course, there, like Sanjay mentioned. And I think it's the idea of bootstrapping. Capital is hard, but there's a way to build it out.
What I found very interesting in the book, which is not very common in the many books written by various entrepreneurs and business people and so on, is the attention you have paid to very personal things, things that have impacted you, right? The importance of culture, habits, values of all kinds, from growing up, by talking to people, surrounding yourself with books, by right kinds of mentors, advisors, all of those things. Tell us a little bit about that whole experience of the culture part, the values part, right? And that made you think of Proficorn and doing all the wonderful things that you did.
See, one of the advantages I've had is that my wife and I have worked together for pretty much the past 30 years. She's very grounded. I thought I was the smarter one. We had an arranged marriage. I very quickly realized she's got a lot of practical wisdom. And as I've built India World Netcore, I keep talking about culture. Culture needs an icon and a storyteller. And she's a storyteller in Netcore. She's a CHRO. And those are the stories. Like, I'll give you one example. Integrity. I think there was a question which came up alluding to this in one of the morning sessions. And I'd faced a similar situation in my life, in my India World, when someone came and said, look, I'll give you a big order, but you need to pay me back. And it was very important for us because we were very small at that time. That order would have made a big difference to us. It would have validated the concept, big brand name. And as I thought about it, and I spoke to a few people, some people said, yeah, this is the Indian way of doing things. Then someone told me, he said, Rajesh, think hard, because you only lose integrity once. After that, you become one of them. And that sort of was the answer to me. I said, we can't do it like everyone else is doing. Even if it takes us longer, let's do it the right way. And there are stories like this through the book. These are lived experiences.
About the time the cops came and you learned something.
That was the second story.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy.
Where basically tech background person, I had no idea about the law in India. There was a vendor who didn't give us the service that we had given a sort of post-dated check for. And that company, of course, encashed the check and tried to encash the check. And when the service was not rendered, I told my people, bounce the check. We should not allow them to take the money. Little did I know at that time that this is a criminal offense in India. Of course, the case went legal, and one fine day, cops landed up with arrest warrants for my parents, my wife, and me. I mean, we were the directors. I was like, one of the scariest days. They come with handcuffs in the office. I had not realized it then, but my lawyer had got a stay order the previous day, but he had failed to inform us. And otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. I mean, we had a small kid at home. And that's when I realized you must know the law. Okay, it does not matter what you are. I mean, I just thought it very logical. I thought like an engineer. Service not rendered, money should not get paid. I had no idea of the rules.
Not knowing the law is not an excuse.
Not at all.
There's one thing also I found very fascinating. I'd love for you to sort of expound on that a bit, where you talk about, and you use the phrase, talk, don't text. Yeah. Right? So tell us about that.
See, we are in a digital world, and all of us basically, even if we are in the next cabin, it's a WhatsApp or a Slack message, or an email which we send out to people. So one day I got a call from an outsourcing company that we were working with, from the CEO of that company, saying, this is a problem. You guys are not paying me. You are not paying attention to what I'm trying to say. I've sent emails. He sent me an email, basically, saying that this is the problem. And he messaged me. And I could sense there was a lot of anger. For whatever reason, my colleagues were giving him the runaround. And then I said, let me just call him. Because he had shut down a service which was critical for a customer of ours, an outsourced development that we had gotten done. And he said, I had no choice. You guys, no one is listening to me. And I said, look, why don't you activate the service and we will talk. He said, all I wanted was someone to lift the phone and talk to me. And that's when it hit me. That sometimes it's just, people are next door, we sort of just treat them as email IDs or phone numbers to be interacted with. There are human beings with emotions. And I tell people, I said, what does it take if there's a problem which has happened? If you want someone to go beyond that extra mile to get something done, all it takes is just walk a few steps rather than just sending them a message. So somewhere in the digital world, that face-to-face connect, that emotional connect, that is so important. I think we have sort of lost it a little bit.
Yeah, it's very, very important. I think talk, don't text, I think is very interesting. There's one other thing that I found interesting in the book, which I want you to expound upon, is about Menaka, the attractive distraction.
Yeah, so this phrase was used by one of our advisory board members. We had been trying to expand internationally for quite some time, and we were not succeeding. So in one of the meetings, our advisory board member, he said, look, I think all you guys are trying to do is to go on international vacations, okay, at the cost of the company. Okay? It's been 3 years. You've got nothing much to show. You're going to play all sorts of places, Southeast Asia, Dubai, everywhere. But what's the outcome? Are you serious about building the international business or not? And that's where he used the word Menaka, an attractive distraction. And it sort of hit us hard, I think, when once he said it like this. And we said, okay, give us 12 months and we will turn things around. And I even tell my colleagues in my company that there are many distractions which happen. Someone raised capital, a competitor launched a new feature. They are all sort of good distractions. At the end of what is the core of a business? The core of a business is you've got to sort of work with customers, satisfy their needs, and get paid at the end of it, and be profitable from that. Just raising capital does not make a business profitable. Okay? Just going on tourism does not make a business profitable. You've got to make things happen. And that's what we did. In the 12 months, we changed our strategy for international. Instead of trying to work with partners, we sent our own people from India to go and stay there. We relocated some of our best people to Malaysia, to Indonesia, and to Philippines. And it was an amazing turnaround which happened.
And and again, this is a personal experience that you've talked of in the book about work-life balance,
Yeah.
right? Particularly for a intense startup going through growth,
Yes.
Not accessing external funding, all of that. So tell us about that whole time that you went through and the advice you got from your wife and so on.
Yeah. So I think one of the common things which comes up is basically work-life balance. I mean, we are today 24/7, businesses are 24/7, and people are expected to be available for a fair amount of time, even on weekends. And the word I like to use is work-life integration. So there's a harmony rather than a trade-off. And I learned it after our son was born, so Bhavna and me. Abhishek was born in 2005. After 5 years of IVF treatment, 12 years of marriage. And I was used to sort of working early morning till late evening. So Bhavna came back home with Abhishek 2 months after from her parents' place. And my work was just going on like this. I would go in the morning, come back in the evening. And that was, Bhavna watched me for a few weeks. And then she sat me down. And I want to read out from the book what she said. She said, I can raise Abhishek on my own. I don't need you for that. Just because he is sleeping most of the day doesn't mean that he cannot feel and understand. You can continue working the way you want, but one day when he grows up and you find that he doesn't have a personal relationship with you, please do not blame him or me. These initial years are very important to build that bond. Once he is older, you may have the time, but he will have moved on. It is the early years when that connection has to be forged. One touch at a time, one day at a time, the choice is yours. And I changed from the next day. So, and I'll just read the last. I'll read the last paragraph. Create time and space for family. They are not just another meeting to be scheduled in the calendar. They are the only ones who will also experience your highs and lows, perhaps even more than you. They are the ones whose unstinted support will push you to greater heights. Make sure you are always there for them.
Yeah. So this is an important message, right? And there's all kinds of stories one hears about, somebody relentlessly charging ahead and everybody else is in the background. Yeah. Big success, celebrated, but nobody knows what happens at the back, right? So this is an important message.
I think this idea of harmony, of integration, I think is very important. You don't look at it as a trade-off. Yes, you have to work long hours, but your family is there with you. And those days, especially for kids, they never come back again. And I think that message from Bhavna, really hit home.
Yeah.
And I think it's the best advice I've got.
Yeah, and it shows. I mean, the way you have expressed
it
in
I just
the book
went
and right here.
Yeah, I spent a few days, 3 weeks ago with my son in New York. I'd gone there for work. Bhavna could not come. And it was, great to see, just spending time together with him one-on-one. And I always think if I had not done that in the initial years, it would have been very difficult to build that bond.
Wonderful. And, we've been approaching the end of this. I want to end on something that I think has a lot of meaning. Because, you are more than just an entrepreneur. You're not yet another entrepreneur. There are so many interests, aspirations. You want to make a difference in society. And I'll just read this bit out. You said, India needs the Indian revolution for freedom and prosperity. There are many ideas that I want to get going on. I know there is one path out there which leads to success. I have to discover that path. It is not going to be easy, but I will try because us Indians deserve better, right? So tell us a bit about that.
So I'd worked on Modi's political campaign 2011 to 14. From the outside, I spent my own money building a 100% startup. I'm the 0 to 1 guy. I can pretty much do in any area. And then for me, the larger thing was, why are Indians poor? What does it take for us to get rich. I mean, Indians are rich when they leave the shores of the country. Not something wrong with us as individuals. So I taught myself economics after that. And the core idea came down to essentially freedom, economic freedom. It's very rare to find countries or people prosperous in a country which doesn't have economic freedom. And you see this in the US, you see this in many other countries, Western Europe, Japan. And I think if we can create something similar in India, and I tried to do this. For 4 years, I worked sort of as I call it a political entrepreneur. I didn't work, I could not change people's minds. The idea was Nai Disha, India needs a new direction. That didn't work out. But I still hope to get back to some of those ideas. I think the question we should really be all asking is, why is India at $2,500 per capita income? We should have been at $20,000 per capita income. Indians in the US are the richest. So you change the rules of the game. We change rulers, but we don't change the rules. So those are some of the ideas. I've written about them on my blog. But maybe one step at a time. I think right now I think I can do better probably by building out Netcore. But this is something for the future that I think I think all of us should really be thinking about the direction that we can help India take for the future. What's that new direction to take us towards mass flourishing, freedom and prosperity?
Wonderful, wonderful, Rajesh. Thank you so much. And that will be the Nai Disha.
Absolutely. Nai Disha for India.